I've worked with hundreds of people, but only one made me walk away from everything I built.
Aaron Kaufman never raised his voice on camera, not once, across 6 seasons of one of the highest-rated automotive series in Discovery Channel history. And in a world constructed entirely around noise, engine blowouts, blown budgets, the kind of manufactured conflict that keeps viewers from reaching for the remote, the man who said the least somehow became the one worth watching most. That quiet carried a particular kind of weight, the kind that accumulates rather than expresses itself, that grows heavier the longer you press it down. Behind the grease-covered precision, behind the focus that made it look like nothing else in the room existed while he worked, something was building steadily underneath. Frustration doesn't always announce itself with confrontation. Sometimes it builds the way pressure builds inside a sealed engine block, steady and invisible and entirely controlled until one day, without warning, it simply isn't anymore. What eventually gave way was his willingness to stay. In 2017, Aaron Kaufman walked away from Gas Monkey Garage and Fast and Loud, one of the most successful car shows television had ever produced, and he did it without a dramatic on-camera exit or a press release engineered to make anyone look bad. He just stopped showing up. What brought him to that point wasn't a single conversation or one terrible afternoon. It was years of watching everything he cared about get slowly reshaped by people, pressures, and industry comparisons that had nothing to do with building real cars and everything to do with packaging them for audiences who had been trained by that point to expect something else entirely. 5 relationships defined the hardest stretch of his career. Not all of them were conflicts in any traditional sense. Some began as genuine creative partnerships, some were real friendships, and at least one started as both and quietly became neither over the course of several grinding years inside a garage that had stopped feeling like one. Richard Rawlings was always going to be first on this list because everything else in the story runs directly through what they built together and what it eventually cost both of them to maintain. Their working relationship began in the early 2000s, years before any television network had any idea who either of them was, back when Gas Monkey Garage was a local operation in Dallas, and Kaufman was the lead fabricator who made the actual work happen. His reputation in that world was specific and earned, the kind that only comes from building things correctly over a sustained period of time, without cutting corners and without compromising the outcome to meet someone else's timeline. Serious restorers and custom collectors who wanted the job done right rather than done fast knew Aaron's name and sought him out for exactly that reason. When Rawlings secured Fast and Loud on Discovery Channel in 2012, that carefully built local reputation went national almost immediately, and the two of them found themselves standing inside something larger than either had fully planned for or entirely anticipated. For a stretch, the dynamic worked on screen because it reflected a genuinely functional division of labor. Rawlings handled the business relationships, struck the deals, managed the network expectations, and kept sponsors satisfied. Kaufman designed and built the cars, which was the only part of the operation he had ever been interested in managing. Each man operated in his lane, and the show reflected that clarity. What changed was the scale and the speed at which those demands multiplied. As Fast and Loud became one of the network's flagship productions, sponsorship commitments stacked up, episode schedules compressed, and the space available for doing things the way Aaron believed they needed to be done kept contracting season by season. Longer builds that honored the actual complexity of the work were exactly what he wanted and exactly what the format was moving away from. Producers and executives wanted faster turnarounds, cleaner narratives, and episode arcs that delivered on schedule rather than on merit. Rawlings, operating a television business with real financial pressure attached to it, had to function within those constraints whether the creative side of him wanted to or not. By 2017, the gap between what Aaron needed from the work and what the show allowed had stretched into something he couldn't bridge anymore. On the Joe Rogan Experience in 2018, he laid it out plainly. No blowout confrontation, no final dramatic straw, just a clear-eyed account of why the show's direction had moved too far from anything he could put his name behind without feeling dishonest about it. Rawlings stated publicly that he respected the call. After leaving, Kaufman founded ArcLight Fabrication, a Ford truck parts and independent custom-build operation that exists completely outside the television ecosystem. Fast and Loud ran with a replacement crew until it ended in 2020. Both men landed somewhere that made sense given who they each were. Rawlings built a brand that carried his name forward. Kaufman recovered the freedom to work on his own terms, which had always been the thing worth more to him than any of the rest of it. Christy Brimbury's role in the Gas Monkey Garage story tends to get simplified by people who weren't in the room for any of it, and that flattening misses what was actually happening. She wasn't an antagonist or an obstacle put there to make Aaron's life difficult. She was the person responsible for holding the operational reality of that garage together during a period when its demands had outgrown everything the place had originally been built to handle. As the show grew, sponsorship requirements intensified, production budgets got squeezed in the places where quality mattered most, and the gap between what the show needed from the garage and what Aaron needed from his work expanded until the two positions barely overlapped. Insiders described repeated arguments over timelines and budget approvals, moments where Christy signed off on last-minute changes that Aaron refused to authorize, and subsequent scenes that got reworked or cut entirely before they reached any audience. Fans watching at home saw completed cars and satisfied clients and a garage that appeared to have its operations fully under control. The version playing out behind the cameras was considerably messier, a quiet and deepening division between the business side and the build side, with two people standing at opposite ends of it and no obvious way to bring them closer together. What makes Christie's chapter harder to reduce to a clean narrative is what she was managing personally throughout all of it. In 2016, she was handling a thyroid cancer diagnosis privately while still showing up to film a television production that had no intention of slowing down for anyone's personal circumstances. She came back after surgery and kept working without making that difficulty the defining story of her time on the show. There was no open feud between her and Kaufman, and when speculation circulated online near the end of the show's run suggesting they had stopped communicating entirely, she never addressed it publicly. By the time Aaron left in 2017, their professional relationship had reached a quiet end, not because of any single breaking point, but from the slow erosion that happens when two people are being asked to serve incompatible goals for long enough that neither of them can pretend otherwise. Chip Foose never walked through the doors of Gas Monkey Garage. He and Aaron Kaufman had no recorded confrontation, no professional falling out worth documenting, and no direct history that put them in opposition. What Foose did was build a different kind of automotive television so successfully and so consistently that networks across the industry began treating his approach as the standard all other car shows should be working toward. Overhaulin' gave audiences week-long build completions, substantial production budgets, and emotional reveals engineered to land at exactly the right moment in each episode, and viewers came to understand that structure as the natural shape of car television, the thing it was supposed to look like and feel like and deliver. By the time those expectations filtered down into production conversations on Fast and Loud, the comparison had already done considerable damage inside the garage. People close to Gas Monkey Garage during that stretch described Aaron's reaction every time the overhaulin' format came up as a reference for what Fast and Loud should do differently. The objection was never to Foose's talent as a designer. The craftsmanship behind that show was real, and the results were undeniable, and Aaron understood that better than most. His frustration was with what the success of that format had enabled producers to demand from everyone else in the industry. Shorter process, larger reveal moments, and emotion delivered on cue rather than emerging naturally from work done well. Kaufman had been fighting that version of automotive television from inside the garage for years, pushing for builds that included real failure, honest timelines, and the kind of imperfection that actually reflects what making something by hand involves. That fight drained him in ways that accumulated quietly over a long time. When he finally left, part of what he was leaving behind was the industry mold that Foose's success had helped harden into place. Not the man, the standard. The version of what car building was supposed to look like on screen, and the growing impossibility of remaining inside a format that kept demanding he become it. Tom Smith made the early seasons of Fast and Loud louder in ways that served the ratings and fractured the internal team at the same time. Opinionated and impulsive, Smith brought a confrontational energy to the shop floor that the cameras were drawn to and that wore badly on everyone who had to work alongside it day after day. Aaron operated methodically, treating every decision, every part call, every timeline, every technical judgment as a direct reflection of the professional standard his name was attached to. Smith preferred improvisation, quick solutions, and creative shortcuts that got the car out the door without slowing down for precision. In a small garage running under the pressure of television production, those two approaches generated friction constantly, and crew members from that period described arguments that broke out over basic elements of the job: wiring decisions, part selection, timelines that Aaron considered fixed. Producers recognized that the tension read well and chose not to resolve it, which meant the dynamic that was quietly tearing the team apart was also being passively encouraged by the people with the authority to stop it. Smith and fellow mechanic Jordan Butler were eventually let go from Gas Monkey Garage early in the show's run, with insubordination as the stated reason. Smith went public with his side afterward, arguing that the shop had come to care more about its ratings than about real craftsmanship. Aaron never responded directly. People who knew him said the situation left a mark, not because of the conflict itself, but because of the environment that had allowed it to develop. A garage where mechanics turned on each other while cameras tracked the fallout was the opposite of everything he had set out to build. Casey Matthew carries more weight than any other name on this list because Matthew wasn't a business conflict or an industry stand-in or a structural opponent. He was one of the very few people inside Gas Monkey Garage who understood what Aaron was trying to protect and cared about protecting it for exactly the same reasons. As the shop's master painter through the early seasons of the show, Casey handled the finish work on nearly every significant build, the flawless paint and mirror-smooth detail that made Aaron's mechanical work look complete in the way it deserved to. Their creative rhythm was one of the few things in that environment that operated without friction because both men were working from the same values and neither of them needed to explain that to the other. It was understood. That shared understanding made the partnership rare, and its loss, when it came, registered accordingly. Production pressure eventually dismantled it. Paint jobs that once developed over weeks got compressed into days as timelines tightened. Sponsors pushed for product integration. Producers wanted the version of the process that looked good on camera, rather than the version that produced results worth looking at. And Casey Matthew, who maintained an independent shop outside the Gas Monkey world and had built his own reputation carefully over years of uncompromising work, was not prepared to have his name attached to the rushed version of his craft. By 2015, he stepped away from Fast and Loud, citing creative differences, and for Aaron, the departure registered as something beyond a personnel change. It was confirmation that the environment had become actively hostile to anyone who cared most about getting the work right, and that the people most worth keeping were the first ones it drove away. 2 years after Casey Matthew left, Kaufman followed. Matthew chose freedom. Kaufman chose peace. Different words landing on the same decision. Both men reached a point where continuing required giving up something too central to who they were, and neither of them had been built for that kind of compromise. Their friendship survived everything the Gas Monkey years produced because it had been built on shared values rather than shared circumstances, and when the circumstances became something neither man could accept, the values were still standing intact on the other side. What these 5 relationships make clear, taken together, is that Aaron Kaufman's departure from Gas Monkey Garage was never a single decision made on a single difficult day. It was the accumulated result of years of incremental losses, watching standards erode, watching the people who cared most get pushed out, and watching a craft he had spent his entire working life refining get reduced season by season to content designed to hold an audience's attention for 44 minutes. Arclight Fabrication exists because he needed to build in a place that answered only to his standard, without a network or a production schedule or an industry comparison deciding in advance what that standard was allowed to be. In the world of custom car culture and automotive television, the builders who care most are rarely the ones who survive longest inside the television version of it. What Kaufman had always offered was something slower and more honest and more difficult than what the cameras could accommodate. And when staying inside that world would have meant performing rather than building, the most truthful thing left available to him was the door.